recently found out I'm supposed to inform everyone that this meeting is indeed being recorded. If anyone else other than ActonTV is recording, they have to make themselves known to the chair at this time. These are the things you learn at the open meeting law seminars. Okay. You have to declare it every time it's there's a record. Every time it's going to be recorded, even if it's a known thing. So, okay. We have public participation. I see there are 2 members of the audience. I would say if you would like to speak to something that's not on the agenda, please come forward now. If you are here to speak to an item that's already on the agenda, I will give an opportunity at each of the major sections on the agenda to speak tonight. And with that, we are quickly on to the quarterly financial report, and I will turn it over to Director Barrett.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Vice Chair, and committee members. So I'm here for our FY19 quarterly report update. We prepare a detailed spreadsheet of revenues and expenses by article. You'll see that on the town's website. We'll publish that assuming we get through tonight's presentation. But the data on the website is actually a dump down by article from town meeting of the different financial articles voted and their status. The PowerPoint is more of a condensed reporting package per se. The big item for us is general fund revenues. As a base, we use our ALG plan until we set the tax rate in December. So that will kick in with the Q2 results. Top left-hand corner, our total revenue, $93.4 million. That reconciles to the ALG plan total FY19 revenue less our reserve use. So we use that as our, our kind of total to hit. If you work your way across, we're at 24.6% total revenue collected per our accounting records. Down a little bit from 18, but not a concern. Property taxes are at a 25% clip. State aid's up a little bit, not sure about that. MSBA, that's our twin school reimbursement of $923,000 a year. That comes in after the first quarter. Also, our local receipts, they're a pretty small component of our total revenue, but at first blush, you would think that our 19 is down given the percentages, but I dug into the 18's actual a little bit, and we had some insulate permit fees first quarter of FY18 that kind of pumped up that number. So, if you look at it, I think we're right on track. The local receipts, the $5.5 million, the major part of that is our motor vehicle excise, probably about 60–65% of that. That comes in our third quarter, which will be January of 19. So again, there's our revenue piece. Again, it's more of a ALG revenue tie out until we set the tax rate, which will occur over the next 30 days. The town manager operating budget, town meeting last April approved $33.8 million in an article. We've spent $11.5 million or 34%. The reason that's kind of high on a linear extrapolation basis is that we have a purchase order system. So we have items, we have blanket POs for utilities and other items. So that's what moves that number up. In general, I'm not seeing any issues right now. That's right about where we would be, where we should be, especially based on our encumbrance accounting. So those are kind of from a real high level. Those are our first quarter general fund results. And again, we can get you any detail you want on the budget. Again, the operating budget of 33.8 million is where we report on here. The other thing that we try to do on the FinCom reports is we try to report on some of our business segments that are enterprise funds. I'll kind of roll through them for you real quick. You know, each one of them, as the FinCom members know, most of you folks are men and businesswomen. Each separate business or enterprise fund kind of has its own nuances and metrics. So we'll go through them a little bit. Septic Enterprise Fund overseen by the Board of Health. You know, they had a healthy fund balance in there, about 63,000 at the end of 18. What you're seeing there is our revenues are lagging a little bit behind our expenses. Doesn't seem to be unusual based on the time of year. Board of Health oversees this one. I don't see a real issue on this one. You will see that we pledge some retained earnings. You can get into the weeds a little bit. The State Department of Revenue requires us to, in some cases, consider allocating fund balance or retained earnings depending on whether a enterprise fund's revenues are 100% sufficient to cover its cost. The other reason why, and you'll see this a little bit later on in probably the sewer enterprise fund, sometimes we will propose initiatives, studies, or other initiatives right out of the enterprise fund, and we will specifically at town meeting appropriate from free cash. So that's a little bit of the nuance, but the Septic Enterprise Fund is pretty much static quo versus last year. So Transfer Station and Recycling Fund, this is our trash fund. This fund, as the Finance Committee knows, has undergone a bit of a transformation. We are now at a pay-as-you-throw from a plain sticker system. That has done real well in terms of lowering our municipal solid trash. At the end of the day, this budget, this enterprise fund budget, is just kind of shaking off the effects of its financial model being changed from a full permit to a permit for some items and pay-as-you-throw for each bag. As you can see, the revenue is pretty steady here. The expenses are down a little bit. There are POs here as well in this fund. And we also did vote some expenses from retained earnings out of this fund. So the Sewer Enterprise Fund, this one's near and dear to myself in that this is a little bit complicated in that it has the construction debt service for our Middle Fort Pond sewer project. That was a $25 million project. We levied betterments to all affected properties in the district, as well as a capital assessment fee to the schools equal to their avoided cost. You'll see our revenues down a little bit in the first quarter this year versus last. I have to look, but we probably haven't billed out our capital assessments for FY19 yet. To the schools, that's about 183,000, 185,000. So the one piece of the sewer fund is the betterment fund, or the capital piece. So we bill out betterment revenue that comes in through the tax bills and through the school and their avoided costs, and we pay off the bonds. That's one piece of it. The other piece of the Sewer Enterprise Fund is the O&M piece, operation and maintenance. Pretty much we have Wood and Current as a vendor running our treatment plant. We've had a series of 3- and 5-year contracts with them. They provide personnel down there. You know, on some levels, they were the original designers, and they oversaw the construction of that facility. On some levels, they're ideal to oversee it and run it. If you ever have a chance to take a tour down there, I was down there in the fall with John Mangiarotti, probably for the first time in 15 years. It's a very well-maintained facility. You would know it's almost 20 years old, but so again, the sewer fund is a little bit complicated or complex. You'll see up there as well, we, at last town meeting, we supported some of our spending through retained earnings. That was for a couple of initiatives. I'd have to get Director York in here to give you the complete details, but we proposed a $190,000 study for a long-term capital plan for the sewer, kind of the sewer plant and that part of our operation. So that is that was approved. We also, if you've been down to Adams Street, this is like a big kind of leaching field. And you'll see the leaching beds down there. Well, in terms of capacity issues, we proposed and we were able to obtain funding, I think it was for about 55 or 60,000 for a study of those leaching fields, if there's a way to expand them. So that's why you're seeing some of that spending pulled out of retained earnings. Those are for like one-time capital items. And at the end of the day, the free cash certification of $902,000 from that fund, that's subsequent to those authorizations. So that's a pretty healthy retained earnings, sewer enterprise fund. So again, I don't see anything there that's alarming at all. Again, it's supposed to be a kind of a net zero where the sewer O&M fees cover wood and occurrence contract, the betterment fees cover the debt service. Over time, we've taken in privilege fees and some other things that have helped kind of buoy a fund balance. And that's a good thing. It's going to give us some flexibility as we go forward. So the ambulance enterprise fund, that was created in about FY 2010. Of note here, I think for the group would be, we constructed the ambulance enterprise fund budget in FY 19 as kind of our ALS budget. The town was always in the basic life support business, but we were part of a regional group, SMERA, for advanced life support coverage. Last September, I think it was September 5th, we kind of embarked on our own advanced life support coverage. At the end of the day, it might not be something that us number crunchers really think about or we look at, but I could, in my own way, explain it to you that it's a really good thing, this advanced life support coverage. If you considered that quilt, the Samara group we were in, and there's a bunch of towns in there with us, and, there were 2 ALS vehicles that had to go everywhere. Now, picture one of the blocks, just us, and we have our own vehicles just supporting our own town. So response times by default have to go down. This is a really good thing, advanced life support, for the citizens of the town. So this budget handles all of that. Expenses are up a little bit. I'm gonna take a look at that. I know, we still had some expenses to retrofit some of our equipment, but the ambulance enterprise fund is a really good example of actions taken that will help the citizens. The fund balance is still healthy. As members of the Finance Committee know, the ambulance enterprise fund annually requires a subsidy. Jeff?
Hi. Just a quick question. If you had to characterize the net loss for the town, in other words, the cost of the ambulances minus all the reimbursements from insurances and fees that we collect from the people, is that the $250,000?
It is, because all of our reimbursements, our insurance reimbursements, all go into the enterprise fund. So at the end of the day, the annual subsidy, what we put in at the beginning of the year, is our estimate of what we would need, probably from a P&L point.
So would it also be fair then to say, let's pretend it's the first year, and the town put in $250,000, but the, what is the free cash certification? Is that similar to retained earnings, exactly the
It
same
is.
thing? It's, okay.
It
I
is.
just, different
Yep.
term, I want to make
Mhm.
sure before I put my foot in my mouth, which I do often. So it says that, let's say that the town has subsidized, but some of the subsidy wasn't required because they made a little bit of excess each year. So the average is a little bit less than $250,000.
Yeah, we've been putting in about 200,000 to 250 a year, Jeff, and it's interesting, you bring up a good point, if you really think about it, and you can't use the word profit, because like you said, it's more of a what's left type of thing. If you think about the 200 to the 250 we've been putting in a year for a good amount of time, having a balance of 408, after 7 or 8 fiscal years, isn't a ton of money. One year we did take a break and not put any subsidy in, and that was the year it lost more than we expected and the fund balance came down. It's one of those funds that will be tempted with maybe adjusting the subsidy for budget reasons, but I would tell you, in my experience, that the lower you get on a certified free cash balance in an enterprise fund environment, and given the state's accounting rules, you don't want to have, a very low fund balance, because then town meeting motions get really kind of messed up. But, yeah, this is annually subsidized. When we first did this in FY10, I think we projected about a $275,000 a year subsidy would be needed to kind of, because we moved eight firemen in there, so we're hanging in there.
And one other follow-up question. So we do get reimbursed for many insurances. Is the reimbursement formula anything we control, or is it, take it or leave it, this is the amount we give everybody in the state, or is there any component of your cost that the insurance companies, or Medicare or whatever?
Yeah, so that's a great question. At one point, when we were going into this business, we ran kind of parallel records with with an ambulance service provider, so we could see how they were getting their numbers. It's completely guided by the insurance companies, and different insurance companies have kind of different rates of reimbursement. They're all pretty similar, but it's pretty much a maddening paperwork bonanza.
Right, but it's not, is part of the component of calculating the reimbursement our cost? Or is it simply that's item 683.7 on some list of illnesses, and this is what we pay for that item?
So they don't per se worry about our costs, but I will tell you this, the average rate, like we bill out for an advanced life support call, I don't know, probably close to $2,000. Now, the problem we've had, or not the problem, but the terminology issue we've had, or the confusion, has been based on the fact that when you run an advanced life support, program, you're not paying for the 1 hour. That bill doesn't just cover that 1 hour where we had to bust down your door and take care of a loved one. It covers the 23 hours where maybe we weren't working before that. So, these are 24/7 services, but they have standard reimbursements. And in fact, Medicare has certain amounts they'll pay. But you'll hear the fire chief on Budget Saturday talk about, we set our rates at Medicare plus 200%, Medicare plus 300%. These are all ways that our billing company tries to maximize our reimbursements. But they're all set in stone, and it's very, very tricky to analyze a $2,000 ambulance bill. These ambulance bills at times seem excessive based on, the amount of time. But if you thought about the mobilization and what it costs to keep our folks up and ready to go 24/7, it can get expensive. So that's the ambulance fund. Again, Chief Hart on budget. I'm not sure if the chief has been out with a bad shoulder. I'm hoping he'll be back for Budget Saturday to give more on that. So the final enterprise fund I'm gonna report on is the enterprise fund. You know, this is a little new for us. We've only been in the transportation business, say, close to 10 years. The enterprise fund, we have a revolving and an enterprise fund, but the enterprise fund, this one has a lot of its revenue, majority of its revenue, right from a general fund subsidy. Also, we take some funds from the commuter parking lot fund, and that's appropriated at town meeting. You know, back when we started looking at transportation a long time ago, I appeared before FinCom, and we talked about how transportation equals subsidy, that to provide these services, a subsidy would be needed. And that's, you know, you see in the $235,000 from general fund. And also, we're pulling a good share of our commuter lot revenues. Now, that being said, we have a you know, an award-winning transportation program in town. And again, that's the enterprise fund. I'm trying to think. So that kind of finishes the scaled down reporting package for the committee. Again, on the website, we'll have a detailed Excel spreadsheet by article, which lines up with the authorizations from town meeting. But if you have any questions on the data, and I can send you this later tonight or tomorrow as well if the committee would like it. But thank you.
Thank you. Please do send along the presentation. Just to reiterate, just to sort of make sure that I ask the question, in all the cases where we're using retained earnings, it's for one-time, basically for one-time items, except for, I believe it was the transfer station where we're using $100,000.
Yeah, it isn't, you know, it might not be in all cases, because on some levels, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit. So the Department of Revenue requires that we explain how we're going to fund these appropriations, especially obviously the enterprise fund ones. They're very conservative with how they look at, you know, they would rather look at a prior year closed balance sheet year, but the answer is yes, most of those are, but in some cases, I think like the Septage Enterprise Fund, that one, I believe, I have to look at that one either for a fee change or a reallocation of expenses. So, and that's how some of these were kind of born in the world of trying to, you know, find a way to take some, you know, some cost relief off the general fund. But I think that's a true statement, Jason, maybe except for the Septage Enterprise Fund where the expenses might be overtaking the revenue and I might have to make an adjustment there.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the use of retained earnings is not masking an operating mismatch, an operating problem.
Well, that's the other side of the coin. That would be what you would see if there weren't capital outlays. But yeah, other than the Septage Enterprise Fund, and I was looking at that tonight, and you have to remember too that on some of these levels, a lot of these enterprise funds are attached to divisions. A lot of those divisions have operations. Sometimes those operations spread their costs out over their general fund and their enterprise fund. So some of those allocations now and then change, or they should be changed. So, but yeah, I don't see an issue relative to, you know, a P&L issue, as you say, other than maybe looking at the Septage Enterprise Fund.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Dave?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I just had two quick ones on the sewer fund.
Yeah.
You mentioned the certified free cash was $902,000, and it was quite a bit above what you normally would see.
Yeah.
You know, what is more of a normal number there, and what typically would happen at this point with that number?
So this is a tough one on that, in that, you know, normally if you get to a certain level of fund balance, whether it be 25 or 50%, you start looking at, you know, rate relief. or expense mitigation. But in this case, Dave, a lot of this, and it gets a little complex, has to do with the town collecting privilege fees. The town fathers back in the day, we built the sewers with some additional capacity. You might have heard the term supersizing. So we built the pipes a little bit bigger to allow for future expansion by people. The way the bylaw worked, we weren't able to build that out until the future, and then it was built out as privilege fees. At the time, I think when we built it, it was like 1.1 million in privilege fees back in 2005. That was out there. We've collected all of those and then some. So, we're starting to put money into the coffers from sewer privilege fees that have come in. But, this fund will provide us a lot of flexibility. And I'm sorry, I'm not really giving you a good answer, because on this one, this one was designed to kind of be a net zero. We build out on the betterments enough to pay for the debt service. We build out enough on the O&M to pay for the O&M contracts. But there's been a couple of things that happened over the years. We built our model at peak debt load. So as the finance folks here know, when you have a debt service arc, we pinged at the higher rate. So that's gonna pull a little interest income over. But again, at the end of the day, the desire to connect to the public sewer system has brought in additional revenues.
And then you mentioned the capital plan, the spending for that, and I should know, but I was wondering if you have any highlights on what that entails. I could follow up with them too.
You did. Well, you probably should. From what I could, this was one of last year's initiatives, but this will be a long-term capital plan for the Sewer Enterprise Fund. So in addition to what we need for our existing plant, they might say we need a pump station replaced in 2 or 3 years. There may be some stuff on expansion in there, but you'd have to follow up with Director York on that, Dave. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, we're going to move on to our preparations for the special town meeting and conversation on the articles, and preferably try and get to a vote on our recommendation or not recommendation for each of them. I did divvy this up sort of with multiple tasks for multiple people. I would also I'd like to see if, Christine, do you have the list of neighboring towns and what's going on first? And then I'm going to come to you after that, Jeff, for a quick rundown on what you found out on from the real estate agents.
So Maynard has approved 2 licenses. Harvard has approved 1. Littleton has approved 2. Acton and Hudson currently have medical marijuana, but we have not moved yet on recreational. Stowe, Concord, Westford, Sudbury, and Wayland are all bans, and Boxborough has deferred their vote. I was not able to find Carlisle's answer. I know they had a special town meeting, but I was not able to find where they landed. So that should get most of our surrounding communities.
Thank you. Jeff, I know you got a response right away from your first conversation, but it sounds like after that it got quiet.
I wanted to just ask a question. When you said Maynard has 2, is that retail or medical?
So retail is 2 for Maynard, 1 for Harvard, 2 for Littleton.
Okay, so they have mix.
Yeah, everyone that has retail also has medical.
Embedded in it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So I reached out to the real estate community. We don't have as many companies based in Acton as we used to. They merged or went out of business. They either, all people I talked to said they don't want to be on the record. And that said, then didn't really want to say anything about or conjecture whether this would have an impact on the town, whether we voted up or down. They did make a point of, at least I'm inferring from what I heard them say, medical marijuana might have less of an impact than retail in terms of people moving into town might be more tolerant of that relative to the negative impact to the town. And uniformly, they suggested that location, location, location. Much like some of the bad things that towns must have, and they tend to put them on the corners of their line so that the other community has to deal with it more than they do. They mentioned, I think Littleton's license is right on the border with Acton. Is that correct on that? So, it's as close to not in my own backyard as you can get by putting things at the corner. So that was the comment, and they really didn't want to go on record as having any understanding or conjecture.
Fair enough. Seems like people who have to worry about political impact definitely don't seem to want to say much. Not casting too much shade on our Board of Selectmen friends, just commenting on the difference between being elected and being appointed. I think one of the advantages we have being appointed is we do not necessarily have to worry about the political aspects of the town. I would also say that if people were to look at the political aspects, the vote at the ballot box was razor thin. I was tasked with getting information from police and fire, and then Mike, I asked you to look into some of the taxation side. Do you want to do the taxation now, or do you want me to do the fire and police now?
I could do it now. It's fairly straightforward, but I think to back that up, I'd like to give examples of the immediate impact, like Leicester. Is that how you say that town?
I think it's Lester.
Leicester, what they experienced their first day of sales, and also something that's more established, like from Denver. The Attorney General had some comments from that he reported, the Attorney General of Denver, that reported in the Denver Post. The other facts are coming from the Boston Globe, just was in yesterday or today. So from a taxation point of view, I think it's very simple. It's 3% of gross revenue from the retailers for 5 years. I don't know what happens after 5 years. I'm assuming the tax goes away or the selectmen impose something else, whatever, but it's just 3% of gross revenue. But I think in order to look at, you can't just look at one side of the ledger. The other, there are some unforeseen circumstances, some hidden costs, there's some community costs. Quoting the Boston Globe, this is what happened in Leicester. The traffic was horrendous. There was long lines of traffic. There's closed streets and detours. Pedestrians were trekking along a highway with no sidewalk. There's public urination, pot consumption out in public. Overly aggressive shuttle bus drivers because, there was no place to park, so they had shuttles set up. And as well as poor communication from Cultivate, which is the business operator. Some neighbors were complaining of traffic 12 hours a day, 1,000 customers on opening day. Traffic jams were a mile long in Leicester, and you can imagine what 2A would look like. Customers waited 2+ hours to get inside, and Leicester is a town of just 11,000 people. The nearby businesses complained traffic was really hurting their sales. And, close to home, there, we have businesses here at Kelly's Corner and even restaurants on 2A that, we're fighting over 3 to 5 parking spaces. And, this would just completely throw our business model out the window, and it would be chaos. Now, For a more established business, we could look at Colorado, which has been doing, has legalized pot statewide, but many communities in Colorado have opted out. So this would only really apply to Denver. And this was the article in the Denver Post. Is written by the Attorney General Bob Traeger, his U.S. District Attorney for the District of District of Colorado. Said the Colorado youth are now using marijuana at a rate of 85%, and that's, that marijuana youth are using at a rate 85% higher than the national average. Marijuana traffic-related fatalities are up by 151%. 70% of 400 licensed pot shops surveyed recommended that pregnant women use marijuana to treat morning sickness. And contrary to promised reduction in alcohol consumption, it has increased. Also, contrary to industry claims, heavy marijuana users end up with more pain and are more likely to abuse opioids. And that's from it was quoted from a Lancet study, which is a medical journal, and how they see our youth. They're selling consumption devices that avoid detection at schools, such as vape pens that look like highlighters and eyeliners, higher potency marijuana in gummy candy, marijuana suppositories, and other candy-like consumables. And the last thing that is really more significant, that has the Attorney General concerned, is really an exploding black market. When you're looking at strictly a cash business, what could go wrong? You're looking at millions of dollars of cash. How do you even track that revenue? How do you audit it? How do you protect it? How do you get a piece of it when you don't know, what the real numbers are? But the exploding black market is really an issue, and just food for thought.
Do you have any other high points?
What's that?
But,
Pun intended.
actually, I have a question on the taxation. My understanding is there's actually two separate 3% taxes. One is as part of the host agreement, and then there is Article 3, which is an over and above excise tax. So it's actually, there's two separate taxes that we could be looking at here,
Yeah, but
correct?
I guess the second one only, I believe, just lasts for 5 years.
So I believe the host impact one only lasts for 5 years, but the regular levy is in perpetuity.
Right.
That's my understanding of it. Is that accurate?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, so in the first 5 years, it's actually a 6% on gross revenue, correct?
Right.
Okay.
How that, we'd like to throw out a number of what that 6% is, but.
Yep.
No,
Well,
no.
I did actually, I have a separate email. I did contact the owner of the medical marijuana. I believe it's called Mass Wellspring, which I also understand is the entity that is most likely to be able to get I called it recreational, and I got yelled at saying, no, I'm supposed to call it adult use, but recreational pot shop license. My understanding is they'd have a leg up because they're already in place. But before I go down some of the non-taxation things, I just want to make sure that I'm sticking on the taxation line. So I wanted to make sure that I've got that we're looking at 6% properly. I am going to call up the email. I couldn't send it in advance, or I didn't dare, because I'm in fear of violating the open meeting law standards. So I didn't want anyone to respond to it. I'm going to throw this up on the screen now so that we can take a look at it. Steve, can you read it? Do I need to make it bigger? What's bigger? So I'm definitely going to caveat this by saying these are numbers from somebody who obviously has skin in the game, somebody who obviously has at the very least, a biased interest. And having never actually purchased marijuana myself, I don't know if $97 per transaction is a reasonable guesstimate. I did ask him to take a look at this, not just in a vacuum, because I think what we've seen in Leicester is probably, the craziness of the traffic in Leicester is probably because it's the first recreational pot shop open east of the Mississippi. So I did ask him to take into account if other shops were open around us. So given the caveat that we have to know where the source of these numbers came from, and given the knowledge that the host impact fee will go away after 5 years, I do want to show that we have some numbers to point to. Yes.
Is this what they predict for if they did retail sales? This is not purely their medical?
This is
implications?
strictly the recreational side. This is not the medical side. It's important to remember that the town does not get any incremental revenue from medical marijuana. There's no taxation that goes to the town. In fact, it's not even taxed. The sales tax is not even collected at the state level. There might be other taxes on medical. I didn't look that too deeply into that. So I do want to point out there are some hard numbers here that look pretty appealing, actually, from my perspective. I would also say that if his per transaction number is light, and again, I have no idea if that would be or wouldn't be, then these numbers can change. Also, there was an article, let me get my notes. There was an article in the Washington Times about the first 2 shops in Massachusetts, and they took in $440,000 in revenue on the first day. Again, I think anything on the early side should absolutely be treated with a massive grain of salt, because this is early times, heady gold rush days for this type of green economy. But that's $40,000 in revenue to the towns in one day. So even say it's evenly split, and I don't have that level of detail, but say it's evenly split, $20,000 a day is a significant amount of money that I think we'd have a hard time turning away. Again, I do not want to make the mistake of taking $20,000 and aggregating it out and thinking we're going to get anywhere near that kind of money. I think in the beginning it's going to be a double-fisted land grab, but then it's going to slow down heavily from there. Jeff?
I wonder if we should see if we can get some kind of estimate around the liquor stores. 15 people per hour seems like a pretty heavy flow. Even, obviously, it's not the steady, what they're purporting to be the steady state. If there's, but it's not unrealistic if there's just one store for the whole town compared to 4 liquor stores, so, and I assume that they're going to have 4 or 5 salespeople. So that's 4 minutes per person, but if you had 2 salespeople, it's 8 minutes per person.
I'm sure if there is demand that the owners will hire appropriately to meet the rising demand.
Yeah, just going back to that first day number, they did $440,011, but that was the 2 retail shops that opened.
Correct.
But also, it was 10,784 units, so it means the average transaction was only $40, $41, not $91 or $97. I can't hear you.
Please come to the microphone.
Yeah, the shops were limited, how much they would sell, about a quarter of what they normally would sell per person was allowed per person, so they wouldn't run out the way they did in Canada the first week they were legalized. So once things settle out, people would likely spend more. If you go on Mass Wellspring's website, you can see the cost of the things that they sell.
Well, that's the thing, it's also an issue of diminishing returns. As more pot shops open, this revenue curve will
Yep.
drop drastically.
Absolutely. That's why I cautioned about, we're not going to aggregate out that money in any way, shape, or form. I would also argue that also plays, speaking off of the financial for just a second, because this was a point that you did bring up. I think the diminishing returns of how much people are going to buy and how busy it's going to be will also have an impact on the traffic. I expect traffic will be mayhem in the beginning. Just like when they opened an IKEA, traffic was mayhem in the beginning. But then once the novelty of it wore off, it wore down to a steady state. And while I firmly believe that there's going to be traffic costs, I don't anticipate that they're going to last past the 5 years that we're going to have the host impact 3% recuperation as well. Was there anything else in that? Was there anything else in that email? No, that's the main stuff. Okay, so again, I am very aware of the fact that there are unknowns here, and that a lot of these are numbers on suppositions, but I did want to get some hard numbers down from somebody who has skin in the game to actually say what they're anticipating.
Well, and would benefit from us believing these numbers.
Yeah, agreed. As I said, take the source into account as you weigh the numbers. But it's also a far cry from the $72,000 that was the initial estimate that the state said they expected per
But is
shop.
that 8.7 million? I'm sorry, I just, I
Yes, that is 8.7 million is his estimated if there's only one other town.
So just theoretically, that would mean that every person in the town who's of a legal age to buy marijuana would spend $500 a year on marijuana?
Oh,
Every person?
I firmly believe we're going to be begging our neighbor towns for purchasers, not
There's
just.
2 in Littleton, 2 in Maynard, and 1 in Harvard? 1 on the border of Acton?
Agreed. Like I said, take the numbers as you wish, but between 72,000 and 520,000. And by the way, I really wouldn't even look at the top line. I would look at the bottom one, just because of the number of dispensaries in neighboring towns, as reported by Christine.
I mean, I'm just arguing, just complete hypothetically, is say 25% of the town's population age that can buy marijuana would buy it. That would imply they would spend $2,000 a year on marijuana. 25% of the town's population.
I have no idea what people spend on pot. I'm sorry.
It just seems extraordinarily high. I mean, I think this data is relatively biased if it comes from the people seeking a license to sell marijuana in this town and show the tax benefits of the revenue in the first place.
So the first thing I said is it's the source, that the source is biased. Jeff?
2 points. When you mentioned that, you know how much it costs for a package of cigarettes?
8, I don't know, 10?
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, that's $1,000 a
You
week.
think 10% of the town of Acton smokes
No,
cigarettes?
I'm just saying, I mean, it's outrageous, but people pay a lot of money for crazy things. Well, we just staying on the revenue side, because I was going to suggest that we could get a ballpark if, on what does it cost to have one 24/7 police officer. We know, we just went over, Steve said it's $250,000 subsidies for advanced life support.
I will show you the questions that I put into fire and EMS in just a second.
Yeah.
Because there is impact, there is comments from them without numbers. Recognize that person on the microphone, please.
Hi, my name's, pardon me, my name's Corinne Hogseth. I agree with what you were saying totally. The 314,000 with only 2 competing dispensaries, there's more likely to be at least 4 competing dispensaries. After 5 years, that gets cut in half. So that even the 157, that's going to be probably closer to the 72. But even if you were to get like the rosiest possible number, the $524,000 up there, I looked at I think the FY18 full town budget was like 95 million, is that right?
If you.
Everything, schools and municipal?
Schools and municipal,
Right,
yeah.
so, but as far as, I mean, I pay taxes to all of it, so that's 0.55 of, less than 0.5% of our total town budget. So even if you got the rosiest number out there, it's a rounding error. So I wanted to put some perspective around that number.
You
Thank
fight pretty hard over 0.5% increases.
But even
here
half,
every
like I said,
year.
but that's the rosiest number. It's more likely to be like well under 100,000 by the time all the neighboring dispensaries are open. Thank you.
Christie.
To give a little context to what Dave was saying, I think it applies still. It was the Mass Department of Public Health did that study. We got an email from Angie So about it, doing a baseline study of usage of marijuana so they could see how things change over time. And they, one of the highlighted points is that 21% of adults have used some form of marijuana in the last 31 days in the survey that they did. And to put that in context, it was highest among those who are 18 to 25. So to get an idea of general town population and what you're looking at in terms of numbers to expect. That's baseline, so
No,
how
that's
that
fine.
changes.
I would counter that with, there's probably not many 18 to 25-year-olds who live in town. I don't know, but I mean, my impression is most of them are in college or live in the city.
Which is why I think the Amherst numbers don't apply as much to us for that.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that.
That comparison, that's good. Also, I'd like to ask Mike a little more about this, because the Amherst police stated that the new people they were bringing in were mostly going to be used for going after black market and gray market. I was hoping you could speak to what the Attorney General in Denver said about the growth in the black market, because a lot of the stories we hear are that with legalized marijuana, the black market's going to go away.
Well, the Attorney General, the term he used is that the black market was exploding in Colorado. And mainly because the huge amount of cash that you're looking at attracts well, I won't say the mob, but they used the term syndicates, and they used countries such as Cuba, Mexico, the usual characters all have the gang interest. They're going to get involved, whether you like it or not. They're very smart. They'll figure it out. They always do. Just like they figured out Atlantic City and all the other casino communities. Somebody's going to get a piece of that you're not intended. But he used the term. This didn't have a lot of details, but he used the term exploding. The black market was exploding, and there were specific countries that he was concerned about that want a piece of not only the sales, but even growing marijuana on federal land, and it's because the demand is increasing. There's opportunity.
Yeah. I would say though there's already a black market. Only now are we able to start undermining the black market by making it legal. So I would feel that we're probably going in the other direction. So I did send some questions to fire and police. The police questions are on top. I'll put them up here so we can all read through them. The good news is there's something for everyone in all these answers. I did, I am a little chagrined that even though I specifically asked for recreational shop, he came back with a higher cost associated with legalization. I was hoping he'd focus on the actual individual shop. I would also say that because legalization is going to be, or because legal marijuana is going to be in our community, especially since, as has been pointed out, there are multiple shops being opened, then the costs are going to be in the town no matter what. And that point is driven home by one of the later questions. So I just want to make sure I give everyone a chance to read that, and then I'll scroll again, because I get to run. Oh, I guess before I scroll, any questions on this? Any comments on this question?
Well, to me, one observation of that comment is, I would infer that they're just not prepared. Period.
Prepared or not, it's going to be open soon. So this was definitely a question that had been brought up in our previous meeting, so I definitely wanted to ask it of the police. I have absolutely no problem putting the cost of security on the business owner. Yes, Mike.
Again, it sounds like that's not the right answer. Just my opinion.
Okay. Jeff, yes, you look like you're,
I mean, we don't see, he wouldn't see any impact until there's a wide distribution of marijuana. I mean, in other words, the fact that it became legal, I don't think would be the significant spike until there's an outlet that people can walk down the corner store and buy it. I mean,
I think that makes sense.
you know, I mean, people who knew how to buy it before it was legal,
Yep.
knew how to buy it before it was legal. The people who didn't, and I'm not sure that, you know, that there's somebody driving a truck with a bell ringing down your street saying, you know, come get your marijuana, because it's illegal.
Yeah, let's not have ice cream marijuana
Yeah,
delivery trucks with noise, with sounds, yeah.
I'm a tiny bit underwhelmed. I can't infer something from that, that there
Yeah.
hasn't been increase yet.
The genesis of the question was actually also just the fact that it could be grown. There's definitely the ability for those, 11 plants to grow at home. So I was just curious if there'd been any, it's been 2 years. I was just wondering if there's been any noticeable change. Just asking the question. Now, I thought this was an interesting one because I definitely want to, I see a theme in the answers here. There's going to be a cost to the town no matter what, is the bottom line that I'm getting from these answers. And I asked that specifically at the end, so foreshadowing what I'm going to say as one of my
In your questions about stops, et cetera, and traffic in general, I presume has to do somewhat with location, like all that insane traffic, you wouldn't want to stick something down at Kelly's Corner.
Yep.
In talking to the police, was there any mention to them of the idea of zoning, the proposed placement?
I did not ask any of the zoning questions. I will be completely honest, I got a little I sort of have my blinders on the topic because since it's likely going to be one shop in town and the medical marijuana shop already has a leg up and has expressed an interest in moving forward, that location is probably, and it falls within the zoning area that's in the, I think it's the third article that we're going to be addressing. I have potentially fallen into the trap of just assuming that that's going to be the location of where it's going to be.
Okay, so you're saying Maxwell Springs, regardless of whether they get to be retail, is in one of the areas that it
That's my understanding.
would be zoned.
Right, John? You're the one that, or,
We should reach Article 2, the districts where a retail shop would be zoned would be along 2A and in the Powder Mill District on the south side of town.
which is where the Maxwell Springs
Yes,
shop is
yeah.
now.
That's correct.
Yep.
The second medical marijuana shop pulled a building permit on November 1st.
Okay. Okay. And are they over in 2A or are they over in Powder Mill? Okay. So it could be a speed race on that one. But no, to answer your question, Christie, I did not specifically ask from the police perspective on location.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
just had a question. If you had determined whether the owner who had pulled the permits on the medical ones owned or operated any of the ones in the surrounding towns?
I don't have any information
Okay.
on that, sorry.
So this question was, I just wanted to know if there'd be any impact, if there'd be any positive impact to it being regulated, and I don't see any reason to believe that there'd be a positive impact to regulation. So this speaks as a net neutral on the topic of whether or not things being tested would be a help or not. If there's not a problem in the black market, it's not something that's going to be remedied by a legalized market. Yes.
There actually has been a significant increase in the last, I think it was 10 years, of the THC in marijuana. So there is some thinking that a legalized market and the creation of labs.
I anticipated your question because you asked it last time.
Oh, what I'm saying is a legalized market might actually create a safer marijuana through it. It's become high potency because that's what's more effective for the black market, because they are actually based on the grams they carry, not the potency of the drugs.
So I'm sympathetic to that argument, but that's why I did ask both of these questions to EMS, and I'm not seeing, while I think that's logical and rational, I don't have it falls in the bucket of the unknowns that I can't quantify. But I did remember your question about THC and did make sure to ask it. So as I said, this is what the conclusion that I'd come to is that there's already a cost in town. So this speaks to a more pro side, but then, as is always a good thing for town personnel, the next answer is a lot more ambiguous. Thank you. Yeah, I have my opinion, but I want to make sure that I back it up with some kind of question. Go ahead.
Hi, just regarding the testing and the bad batches, there was an article in the Wicked Local last week, I think, an article by Dave Padula, who is a big pro-pot person. He actually wrote an article very critical of the Department of Public Health's handling of concerns regarding the testing of medical marijuana. He says there have been many illegal and immoral cultivation and production tricks used by cultivators in order to appear in compliance as well as make sure their products test clean for banned chemicals and pesticides. And that's just, you can look at the article. He says now, these complaints actually come from employees of cannabis establishments. So you can look that up. He says the DPH has not responded to any of their complaints, their concerns. So my question is, if they're not overseeing the medical side of it while they're putting patients at risk, why would we trust that they could have good regulation of recreational cannabis? Thank you.
Jeff, did you want, Christie?
The proposed ban includes cultivators, manufacturers, and testing facilities in addition to retail. We've only discussed the impact of retail. There have been concerns, especially out west, about water usage and other things, and I have a question of whether our town laws regarding wastewater usage, water usage, et cetera, are sufficient at this time. Like, if this passes, are we opening ourselves up to a bunch of problems in terms of infrastructure?
It's a good question. I didn't ask anything of the DPH on the water side. Yes, Mike.
We have some numbers. According to Denver, 2.2 liters of water per plant per day for indoor grown plants. And since, Acton is really sensitive to water consumption for any new growth, I think it's a relevant number. As far as energy, it's 17 times more power required, to raise a plant than an average residential house.
Yes, but both of those are utility costs that would be borne by the facility, would it not?
Yeah, but it's still energy resources that you're taking up that we don't have, is what I'm saying. We don't have a surplus of water. Everything comes from wells, the water aquifers, and so on.
I'm sympathetic.
We're eliminating new housing development because we don't have water to supply.
I'm sympathetic to the water argument. I'm not sympathetic to the electricity argument. I mean, it is, as with any other commodity, the more scarce it becomes, the higher the price will be for that.
It's just a point of reference. It is 17 times more. And they could use solar panels and cover that.
And that'll be part of the cost that that facility has to take into account. Something you said earlier, Christy, I do wish that this ban was not a complete blanket. Absolutely everything that has to do with cannabis is off the table. I wish that we'd be able to do, if we'd been able to do one or the other. And I will also admit that I have been a little myopic on the topic since there is a medical shop in town. The chance of it being converted into recreational, I think, is the clear and present, I don't want to say political, but the clear and present issue that we have to address, because that's the most likely outcome if Article 1 is not recommended. Jeff?
I'm still going back and forth on the pluses and minuses. One of the things that just hits me is, on a Sunday when the Patriots are in Foxborough, all the surrounding towns are pretty bumper to bumper, and they don't get any revenue from that. If towns like Concord if they've banned it, and the closest one is just over our border to Littleton, there's certainly going to be a lot of Concord cars driving up 2A to get to Littleton, and it's 2A and 119 is pretty bumper to bumper as it is right now. So there is that sense of if it's going to be, make sure that you at least get some revenue from it, because you're going to have some of the expenses to it. But I do agree with Mike about the water. I'm really concerned about having participated in the water seminar that we got together. I'm really, really concerned about that. I can't even fathom 22 liters a day. Oh, 2.2. Oh, I was going crazy. Well, even 2 liters is, is kind of a lot, but it's not per plant, I understand, but still, we have to factor that in that, just as we're working P&L, we've got to be working the resources.
Understood. To your point, though, since you did the conversation with the real estate and they said location, 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 I do want to point out the location of the current medical shop. It's about as big as our neighbor on Maynard as we can possibly get. And it is not an area where anybody could easily walk to it, which again speaks to the negative on the traffic side. But I'm not concerned about kids walking to the shop along Powder Mill Road. I mean, that's a long hike from the nearest residential side. And I do recommend you take a look at the aerial view of where that building is in comparison to residential shops in town.
I think maybe it's because of the peak load, but Leicester, people are parking miles from it, and they're now saying they need sidewalks so that they can go walk to it.
Oh, the
So-
sidewalk fund's gonna love that.
Yeah.
No, I fully anticipate that the beginning is gonna be mayhem. I stipulate that right from the start. The only other thing I'd like to say is that we have spent quite a bit of time in this body talking about trying to expand the tax base. This is one of those opportunities to expand the tax base, whether it's 0.5% of the total budget or look at it as a significant percentage of the municipal side budget. This is one of those opportunities to shift tax base. Christine, did you want to say something?
So I understand there's been a lot of citizen pushback against the water rights at NAGOG, but when the district manager of the, Acton Water District speaks, he says that the aquifers are deep and many, and that we are not in any kind of water crisis or water shortage. Am I missing an element?
I don't know enough about it. Anybody else want to weigh in?
I'm going back to the large dioxane plume that's coming to us under the Aspet River, and the fact that Littleton has just gone after Concord because they're seeing increased needs for water. My understanding is that our water table is rising, that's not a good thing relative to having potable water in aquifers. My other understanding is that when the Acton Water District said that they didn't foresee a particular need for the water out of NAGOG, that was taken somewhat out of context, that they hadn't looked into it very much, but that's a vague memory I have.
Regarding the water, just from a personal perspective, we can only use our water every other day in the summer, so that's how I see water impacting us. That's always suggested to me for the 20 years that I've lived here, that water is a finite resource. Regarding expanding the tax base, we can't get a Panera in this town. I mean, people have been begging for a Panera or something at where the old McDonald's is. I think there are other ways we can expand our tax base that are much more in line with our town character or brand or whatever you want to call it. And I have a question for you. You said that you think there'd only be one recreational shop in town?
The way that the second article is that we'd be limited to 20% of the number of liquor stores in town. So it would then, by default, we'd have one. Where it gets interesting is if the town were to issue another liquor license for a store, that would be 6, and it's a round up. So
Yeah.
that would allow for a second shop in town.
Okay, I thought it was already going to round up to 2. Maybe I was wrong.
Nope, it rounds to 1 at the beginning, unless I'm wrong about that.
No, I think that's right. However, that only is effective if Article 2 passes.
That is only effective if Article 2 passes.
Right.
That is correct. Yes,
Thank
Mike?
It's close to home. If there's not a water issue in town, why am I not allowed to water my lawn in the summer?
I just thought it was because we lived in a hippie community.
Mr. Benson?
It's a conservation measure. It's not that there's no water crisis in town, and what the Water District has explained on their alternative sources of water, Nagog Pond was on a list of 4 or 5 down. It was explained to me that we pump about 1.7 million gallons a day. We're licensed to register to pump 1.9. We have the present capacity to pump up to 3 million gallons, and the water district professionals believe that we can add another 800,000 gallons a day from, what we have and can access.
Yeah, but I thought the whole purpose of Concord going after that water was so that they can water their lawns when they want to.
They use a lot more water than we do, particularly in the summertime. And they want to shift over and make Nagog Pond a primary source of water for the future. And I take it you people are aware of the lawsuit that Concord brought against the municipal water department in Littleton. You are?
A little bit.
A little bit, okay.
Again, though, it's a utility. It's going to be paid for by the users. Go ahead.
Because this is FinCom, so I just want to bring the number back. The reason why at least for me, that I moved to Acton because Acton has very good school and it's a very well-rounded town. And so if you look at the number that I know the Wellspring, that number is biased, but even if that number is correct, the number because the house value is decided by supply and demand. If the demand is just less 1%, the property tax that we can collect is far more, 1% is far more than the revenue we can get. So please take that into consideration, because just this recent years, there is a lot of uncertainty in Acton. There is impact for people for moving into Acton, and that will have an impact on the supply demand on the house prices. So please take that into consideration. The other thing I want to bring up, I sent the email in the article that in Maynard, the current, because they have 2 recreational marijuana, currently the revenue is based on, you collect revenue, you have to see the number, how much money they make. So right now, the way the process is, the transaction is handled by the town accountant, and depends on how much they reported. Then you can collect the tax. So that is the real number that town of Acton can actually receive. So there is also the staff impact at the town of Acton, because if you want to really actually collect that money. So I really want to bring the big picture, which is the overall, when this town a lot of things are illegal. So why people move to Acton? I think that's a big question that I'm asking you to consider, because that has a direct impact to the house value, because only demands can drive the house value up. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks. I came here today. I'm a 33-year resident of Acton. I go to town meeting every year. I look forward to what FinCom says on every article that we vote on. My recollection, I don't always agree with what they have to say, but I respect what they have to say, because they are making a decision putting aside politics and personal choice for what is financially best for the town of Acton. What I heard here tonight was not about what is financially best for Acton. It's about, is it morally right for people to use marijuana? Well, that's not the issue. The issue is, it is now legal in the state of Massachusetts for people to buy it and use it within certain limits. Whether or not Acton chooses to take advantage of a great revenue source will be decided next Monday. Whether or not you believe the numbers that Mass Wellspring puts forward, they're coming from what their business plan is. They may not reach those numbers. It'll depend on how close and how many other stores are open. But this is the one retail business outside of restaurants where the town of Acton actually gets anything. We have 5 liquor stores in town. Concord has one tiny little town. Most people in Concord come to Acton. They bring traffic to Acton. They buy their booze in Acton. But Acton gets nothing for that. Cash business, Bagels Plus is a cash business. I don't see that being a problem. Lottery tickets are a cash business. You can't pay with your credit card or with a check. That doesn't seem to be a problem. You can suppose that the retailers are going to maybe cheat and put it under the table, but then there'll be consequences for that. Kids are not going to be able to even walk into any of these dispensaries. I visited dispensaries when I was out west out of curiosity. They have an ante room. They check your ID as you walk in. When you go in, and if you want to purchase something, you have to show your ID again. If I had kids underage, which I don't, and I wanted to take them to the liquor store while I go buy a 6-pack, they can come with me. When I'm in the restaurant and I'm buying alcohol, kids are there. God knows there's a brewery within walking distance of the Gates School. But do we see kids from Gates going over and having a beer on Thursday afternoons? I don't think so. People at Mass Wellspring or whoever gets licensed are not going to put their business in jeopardy to sell this product to people that are underage. And the reality is, in the 30 years I've lived in town, underage kids have easy access to as much of this and anything else that they want. And if my kids were underage, I might hope that they're getting something from a dispensary rather than from their friend, and who knows what it's tainted with. And yes, there have been deaths from tainted marijuana. There were 2 people who died on the Cape last summer who bought the street drug. It was tainted with, I forget the name of the drug, but with one of the
Fentanyl?
Fentanyl, thank you. And they didn't know, and they died of an overdose. So, be that as it may, in terms of the finances, we get 3% going forward on all recreational sales, plus the 3% for 5 years. In addition, according to the state, the company agrees to pay a paid police detail for purposes of traffic and crowd management during peak hours of operation. This isn't just for 5 years, this is forever, which shall include but not be limited to Fridays between 3 and 8 and Saturdays on Sundays. So if it turns out that there's a traffic issue, and if it's Mass Wellspring down on Powder Mill Road where Last Wine Company used to be, which is about a half a mile of road in the town of Acton, Acton Police would get detail work to control traffic there. In addition, that the company will work with the municipality and provide staff to participate in a reasonable number of municipality-sponsored education programs on public health and drug abuse prevention geared towards public health and public safety personnel. That's in addition to the 3 plus 3% we get for the first 5 years and 3% thereafter. If we get $300,000 in revenue, how much is that equal in real estate? What is it, about $12 million of assessed value to get $300,000? How many millions of dollars?
Okay, I believe we're good at this point.
And this is without adding any children to the school district that have to be educated at what, $12,000, $13,000 a head a year?
$14,100.
Thank you very much. I can't keep it. So I urge the FinCom to consider what's financially best for the town of Acton. And if any members of the FinCom have any association with the pro-Article 1 article, I ask that they recuse themselves from voting, because it seems there's a conflict of interest there. Thank you.
Okay, so we have now spent a good hour. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Just because I was curious, I was interested in a comment about real estate valuation. We can't get from the realtors what the impact was.
That's why I asked you what to look at.
However, I did the math.
Okay.
If there is a 1% decrease. We are about $2.66 billion in valuation in total. If you take 1% of that, divide by 1,000, multiply by 19.25 for a couple of years ago, that comes out to $50,000. So the impact on, for every 1% up or down.
Is about 50 grand?
Is about $50,000.
Thank you for that. Okay, I think anybody else have any questions, or is now the time to, before we entertain motions on this, I do want to say that we're going to take the motion for Article 1, and then we're going to take two motions for two possible outcomes for both 2, 3, and 4, because of the interdependency on how the first article goes. Anybody care to make a motion?
Just to be clear, we could also take a motion that says no action.
We could, but as we discussed in our last meeting, I think it is important for us, since we are not elected officials, as appointed officials, I do think it is our responsibility to make a recommendation to the town, one way or the other. If we are completely deadlocked, because we're 8 people tonight, if we're completely deadlocked, we're going to have to do this again right before town meeting.
So I wasn't raising it relative to the split. I was raising it relative to the accuracy and ability to use the numbers in the P&L and a degree of certainty. So certainly on the revenue side, there's considerable uncertainty. On the expense side, there's uncertainty because we've got people who aren't really deciding one way or the other how much it's going to cost.
There's a reason I left that on the screen as the parting shot.
So I mean, I'm not denying that as a CPA, that, I could look at some numbers and say, in general, it's better or worse to go this way or that way. I'm just suggesting that the uncertainty is very difficult. If we took no action, we could still, I think, lay out some of the pluses and minuses, but so that as give guidance to the community as to what they ought to think about, like you didn't think about water for cultivation, to bring that issue up, or to talk about the fact that we're concerned that if we go without getting the revenue, we still might have a significant expense side because people are going to be traveling through our town.
Oh.
So all I'm saying is personally I'm troubled by the uncertainty to come up with a, yes, we could get one way or the other.
Mr. Chairman, I think it was mentioned at our last meeting and sort of alluded to earlier tonight that the Finance Committee really should be recommending or not based on the financial impact of the article to the town. And in this case, it's the net financial impact. I take a bit of exception to the fact that there hasn't been a lot of discussion around costs and revenues, because I think that's what we've been talking about for the last hour.
That's why I tried to get what I could in the way of numbers.
What's become clear is that, and as Jeff mentioned, it's very difficult to get any degree of precision here. Agreed. At all.
Agreed.
It's 550,000 if there's no other retailers. One, it drops to 350 or so if there's 2. It may not be linear, but we know there'll be 5. So, the state estimates 72,000. I think as a FinCom, the most we could hang our hat on is 100,000.
Okay.
There are going to be costs if we do this. Some quantifiable, some not, some direct, some indirect, some that the town will bear, some that are social. But again, we're not going to be able to get our arms around those numbers. So I'm inclined to agree with Jeff that we can put forth those facts, but the fact is we really can't recommend for or against based on the financial impact to the town, I don't think. And so I would recommend no recommendation.
Is that a motion?
Yes, I would move no recommendation.
Do I have a second? Second. Okay. We've done quite a bit of conversation. Anyone want to talk about the motion, or can we proceed to a vote? The vote is for a no recommendation. All those in favor of no recommendation on Article 1, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed to a no recommendation, please say aye. Aye. Roland, did you vote? You voted for no recommendation? Okay, so there were 5 for no recommendation? 1, 2. Christie, is that correct? 5 for no recommendation? No recommendation, please raise hands. That's 5. That's a majority vote. Okay. So we move on to the second article, which is, make sure I get it right, the zoning. Again, there's 2 ways this can go in town meeting. If Article 1 is approved, this article has no bearing and is probably going to be moved to have no action by the Board of Selectmen. Can I have a motion for what to do in the case that Article 1 is recommended by the town, is adopted by the town, and we've moved on to the second motion? Anybody? The second article is to amend the zoning bylaws. If this is my understanding, and unfortunately John has just left, my understanding is that if the first article is adopted by the town, there is no need for this second article. So do we move, would someone please move that we take no action in the case of?
So moved.
Seconds. Thank you.
I don't understand what we're talking about right now.
The
Are you
motion,
saying
if Article 1 is adopted,
which means we pass a ban?
we pass a ban.
This article still goes forward?
This article is, but they're going to, we have to say what if we think it should go forward or not.
Even if there is a ban?
Even if. That's why this is a pro
And
forma
what
quick vote.
we're talking about right now, what to do if 1 passes? Okay.
Yes.
Could I recommend that we just take a position if Article 1 does not pass?
I want to
Because
do
of-
both. I want to have it on record of both sides, both permutations of this.
Okay, but it's,
There is a motion on the table that we take no action onto if 1 is adopted. It has been seconded. All those in agreement, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Good. Now, Jeff, would you like to make a motion in the case? Would anybody else like to make a motion in the case that Article 1 is adopted and Article 1 is not adopted and Article 2 is brought to the table?
all right, I move that if Article 1 is defeated and Article 2 is brought up, that we support Article 2. And I'll speak quickly to the reason, I got to get a second.
It is moved and seconded. You'd like to speak to your motion?
Only because the realtors did say location, 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 and this tends to try and put those facilities in a proper location within our town. And that will have an economic bearing based on real estate values, et cetera.
Very good. Any other comments on this motion? Yes, Christie.
The proposed zoning locations are also currently designed to handle large traffic flow, so we're not having to look at having to deal with putting in new lights, dealing with additional traffic details necessarily. I appreciate what Astrid said about that being covered by the businesses already, but it sounds like we're not looking at additional infrastructure costs on the traffic level with this zoning.
Any other comments on this motion? We'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor of recommending Article 2 in the case that Article 1 is defeated, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Very good.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I am pleased to move that the Finance Committee adopt local option excise and retail marijuana sales under all circumstances. Sorry, I'm flair for drama.
Okay, moved and seconded. Before we take a vote, did you want to allow for the possibility that we shouldn't even comment on it if it's not going to be
I
adopted by
move
the...
that we have no comment on this particular
That's
warrant
a
article.
second, that would be a second motion.
Oh.
So,
I move that we accept Article 3, adopt local option excise on retail marijuana sales under all circumstances.
recommend. You move that we recommend.
Yes.
And it was seconded by Christine. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Should we bother to do the pro forma?
Did his motion not just cover both inevitabilities?
His did, so we'll leave it be then. Okay, and then lastly, Article 4. This is a temporary moratorium. In the case that one is defeated, do we want to extend the moratorium while more paperwork occurs? Are there any
Mr.
motions?
Chairman, I make a motion, we extend the moratorium.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Just a point of order, the moratorium covers two circumstances.
Okay,
One, if Article 1 passes, it extends the moratorium until the Attorney General has an opportunity to review and approve the ban, or the new general bylaw. And then
Okay.
the second piece of the extended moratorium would cover the situation if Articles 1 and 2 fail and we have nothing before the House. It buys us additional time to come up with a remedy. So you're voting on two circumstances in Article 4.
one motion, no. There is a motion to...
But the article captures both of those in the text.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's either pass, fail.
Yes.
So I move that
You move that we recommend.
we recommend it.
All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay. I believe we have our votes for special town meeting preparation, and we can now move on to Finance Committee business. We'll start with minutes. Christie, I know you sent out minutes earlier today. Did anyone have any edits or comments that they'd like to make on the minutes?
I received no edits or comments.
Anyone want to do anything live? I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I motion that we approve the minutes.
Thank you. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Yes. Great. Well, we got one abstention. Okay. Now we'll move on to committee reports. Dave, do you have any committee reports?
No, sir.
Roland? Nope. Christine? Jeff? Microphone's all yours.
I did attend the school committee meeting, and they want to point out that there's public input on the building. One was tonight. The next one is Thursday, the 29th, at 7 o'clock. The site options. Evidently, the option that was going to require the taking, or not taking, but negotiating with the town for land is no longer on the table.
For Elm Street Playground, yes,
Yeah,
that is correct.
playground. It's no longer on the table. It turned out that even if they could get the land, the wetlands, et cetera, would create a very narrow but tall building.
And the architectural diagram of what that building looked like was god-awful.
Yes. So, so we're down to 2 instead of 3. The first pass budget is they're going to talk about 12/5, December 5th. The superintendent said they're pretty much flat from last year, this year, in terms of their spending. They talked about number of students in the schools, and if you can visualize, they had 2 or 3 in recent memory scenarios of how the populations would go. One of them was draconian, that we were almost going to lose everybody, and the others were less and less. And they've been finding that the dip is not nearly as severe as they had thought, and they're much more level from year to year. They talked about changing the school structure of periods and rotating long blocks. We don't really need to worry about that much. But they went on to talk about they felt there'd be no operating override in the near future. That was Marie Altieri said that. The health insurance trust, they said, would have 0 increase, but they were going to vote in November. So it's almost the end of November for the rates next year. But they were assuming it was going to be flat. That's all the relevant financial information that came up at the meeting.
Thanks, Jeff. Christine?
And then
Oh,
I have selected two.
do you have something to say on this topic?
Can I ask a question about the MSBA forum on Tuesday and Thursday night? So is it that the testing was done and they've come back with some equally viable land use? I'm surprised that there wasn't, just this one makes the most sense scenario, and that they're going back to the public for more input.
So my understanding is that both options are viable and both options are flawed. So the question is, which flaw is the town most likely are the towns most likely to be comfortable with?
And both parties agree on these flaws, and that it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, as far as financing and investment by MSBA? So
it's not going to change the reimbursement rate from the MSBA, and it is still they are going to be 2 different priced buildings, 2 different priced projects. The question is, which one do we as a wider district community want to pursue as we get to our recommended selection to the MSBA for our January 2nd or 5th meeting? I can't remember which one it is.
Okay.
So I have a strong opinion on which one is the better fit, but I will keep my mouth shut. Jeff, you have another update?
At their last meeting, the Board of Selectmen, you may know that there was a 40B put in for 4 Piper Road. And the selectmen had voted their displeasure and sent a letter to the Mass Housing Authorities saying that they did not like it. There was a lot of discussion from a South Acton committee that said that you weren't strong enough, you didn't point out all kinds of flaws and other issues that should have been pointed out. So there was quite a bit of input from the community about that. Obviously, as we know, as soon as one of those 2 big projects come online, we would qualify for the 2-year safe harbor. So let's hope one of those comes in soon. They talked about the fact that there's now a municipal monthly that's going up on their website. Anybody who's paid taxes knows that the quarterly bill, you get a little flyer. Well, now it's going to be monthly updates, so check the website. A monetary issue, the Home Goods nonprofit has applied for a special permit to site plan to change the traffic and flow in their property to get ready for potentially an extension. And they asked the selectmen to waive the $3,700 cost of adding a sidewalk on that side of the street. There already is one on the other side of 27, and they waived it, so $3,700. But universal praise from everybody around that was short money to have such a wonderful organization in town with hundreds and hundreds of citizens volunteering and working there. I mean, it's almost like therapeutic to some of my friends that go there, so it's less they have to spend for the nursing, mental health. There was some talk about gas leak and roadway maintenance. They're trying to align the cost of digging up for gas with the schedule of when we're going to pave streets. And basically, if we paved a street a year ago, and the gas company is going to pay a lot more money if they want to dig up that street than if they've got to dig up a street that's going to be repaved in 6 months. With exceptions for gas leaks, of course, they talked about. Kelly's Corner, again, moving forward, I think we reported last time about what the Department of Transportation said to us. It seems the Kelly's Corner Committee met, and they were okay with most of the input from the Department of Transportation. They understand why they don't want bricks. There's going to be some compromising on lighting and raised islands for pedestrians. The interesting financial impact is if we do have raised islands, the Department of Transportation said, fine, but we're not going to maintain them. So they're going to have to find the money in the town budget to maintain those islands. Now, in my neighborhood, there are a couple islands, and they're maintained by the garden club or local citizens. So maybe there's a way of kind of getting citizen involvement in that, but I don't know how much it would cost to maintain, especially in that intersection at Kelly's Corner. That's a pretty active intersection. I'm not sure I'd want somebody puttering around in the middle of that busy street. 3 in the morning? Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Since we're recorded, I won't say my joke. We'd come back with you for that. And then they actually came up with a compromise on the restaurant at Kelly's Corner, the old Midas muffler place. They were able to get the Department of Transportation to agree to push something a couple feet one way or the other, and that they're going to get 3 parking spaces back. So, you know, creative tension kind of works. I was surprised that there's 121 trees they're taking out, and they're going to put 157 trees in. And that many of the trees that are coming out were not in great health, and also a significant number of them are invasive species. So again, that would be a nice trade-off. Nobody's going to be fully happy, but they certainly addressed that issue, and I thought that was going to be something that could never get through. They did their annual renewal. They renewed all the license for liquor and for cars, so there were only 5 locations for liquor, so that was okay. There was a lot of discussion about the fact that the town of Littleton is being sued by the town of Concord, because the town of Littleton is saying that the 1985 Act supports the 1884 Act of giving stuff to Littleton and Acton, because in the 1884 Act, which gives a NAGOG to Concord, there are clauses in it that talk about, but Acton and Littleton can take water from it, and if they need it, ahead of Concord. So, and Concord, is, in this case, is saying 1985 Act superseded all that. There was even talk about Well, the Acton Water District wasn't in existence back then, so what standing do they have in front of the land court? And so a lot of discussion, and basically the selectmen said that they were going to go into executive session at the end and talk about whether we should be a friend of the court. And I don't know on whose side we're going to be a friend of the court on, but there's an interesting discussion between land rights and resource rights. And there was some legal distinction between the 1884 Act, what did it work on, and it did not seem to supersede certain other rights. So lawyers are going to make a killing on all that. There was and then relative to us, there was discussion about a open meeting law complaint. I don't know who this gentleman is, but he seems to be liking to file suit. And it turns out that there was at the ALG, 2 selectmen were at the meeting, participating in the ALG, but 2 others wishing to watch and see what the meeting was about or whatever were in attendance. And this gentleman says that that was a violation of the open meeting law because you didn't notify anybody that there'd be a majority of the selectmen participating in something. And the answer came back that from legal counsel, the Attorney General has made it quite clear that your physical presence does not constitute a quorum relative to the open meeting law. And so even just on that basis alone, they will respond that they don't have to respond. But the other part is that none of the selectmen participated in the discussion. They didn't even comment, they just were physically there. So what it means for us is if 5 of us showed up at the school meeting on Thursday, we just got to be careful that we know who the designated representatives are.
Well, it's actually we just had this training. If a quorum shows up at a public meeting, you are not allowed to speak on behalf of the Finance Committee. You must only speak as a private individual, and we must not have any deliberations. So, easiest thing is feel free to ask questions. Just do not identify yourself as a Finance Committee member and/or use the caveat of standing up and saying, I'm asking on my own behalf. So
you don't need to just decide who's going to be. Well, this is just public meeting. It's not like the ALG. And ALG, you know who the 2 people are. I mean,
yep.
And that's it. I think. Yep.
I'll do mine last. Tom.
Oh, is that household? Yeah. I purposely left off ministry.
Christy, any community updates?
Jeff pretty much filled you in on the Kelly's Corner project. No, thank you. The only thing outstanding on that project is that there was a discussion with the Acton Historical Society and the Acton Historic Commission about trying to take 2 feet of land in front of Hosmer House in order to put a sufficient sidewalk in. They won't really agree to do that. They came up with a lovely plan that they're not willing to sign off on. So in order to get the plans passed, because that's a historic district, they figured out how to move the road 2 feet on the other side. That means those trees in front of the plaza are coming down. And on the point of trees going up around town, it's not, those trees that the town is putting back are around town, and it has been most recently stated that they're going to be using the caliper method, so it's not just you take down a big honking tree and you stick a little tiny one. They're going to actually be putting up comparable tree circumference. So one large tree could be replaced by 5 smaller trees, where the circumference of those adds up to the circumference of the larger tree. The Kelly's Corner Steering Committee is also facing an open meeting law complaint about not having released minutes in a timely manner. We will be meeting on Friday morning to cover all minutes, review all minutes, approve them, and discuss the open meeting law.
Mike.
I'll go quick. We do have news on the Walker property, also known as 348, 364 Main Street Committee. We sent out an RFI, a request for information on for potential development opportunities for the Walker property. We got 4 responses. I'll summarize them quickly. One was for I can send you the detail if you wish. The first one was for a dog park. Let me first remind you, we bought that property back from Mr. Walker for $1.8 million. Our intention was to, at least from the Finance Committee, to get back our $1.8 million. So the first proposal was a dog park. You know, they're very interested in the 2-acre open area, you know, which is the undeveloped portion on the left side of the Kennedy landscaping. They would put a dog park in there. I think they would get funds from Roland's group, Conservation, I think, to, yeah. And they would also, we wouldn't get any money, but they would also have to form a Friends of the Dog Park in order to incorporate that the dog park will be maintained, and they collect some funds for that. That was their proposal. Also, the other half, like the Kennedy landscaping piece, is they didn't address that, so we still have to do something with that. So the second one was a very detailed proposal from the Acton Housing Authority. They would put in 31 units, all seniors, affordable. It would be one sort of cool-looking barn-like structure, and they would pay the town $1 million. And it could be also a possible dog park in some of the open space. The third proposal was from the Now Communities, which is a developer. They did a very nice job at Riverwalk in Concord, which is sort of an award-winning development. They would put in some cottage-style homes, 16 single-family homes, 2 to 4 subsidized units. They would pay the town $1.8 million. They would also use part of that to put in a dog park, and they would also use some other remaining open space in there for community gardens. That was their proposal. The fourth and final proposal was from Win Stanley, who was previously had submitted a Kelly's Corner proposal, or at least for the Kmart site. They're proposing 22 small 1,800 square foot modular homes with the second floor basically unfinished. No affordable units, and they would pay the town $500,000. So basically, the committee will be taking 2 of these proposals, you could probably guess what 2, at least 2, or maybe all of them, to have a public forum sometime in January to get more feedback, and with the hope that we could take a specific proposal, a finalized deal, to town meetings, to the spring town meeting. That is my report.
Thank you, Mike. Jeff?
Question, did you say 1.8 we bought it for?
Okay. Continuing the theme of open meeting law complaints against different subcommittees, there was an open meeting law complaint against ALG. We met to discuss it, I guess, late last week.
Did you meet behind closed doors?
We met in this room, publicly announced, and all the rest, had fun stuff. The complaint was that we did not have our minutes out in an appropriate amount of time. Doing the count back, it was determined that the open meeting law complaint does not comply with the number of days since the violation. Other than that, we do have an ALG meeting on Thursday morning. I have received the updated spreadsheet, although I received it too late to look at it in advance of today. Steve, I would like to sort of reiterate that we'd asked to have that information on Mondays. I did get a call from the town manager requesting it slide. Okay, but again, making the request, we'd like to have this information. And then just to reiterate, we had discussed as a result of the last ALG, whether or not we wanted to have a debt override for Minuteman, and the resounding guidance I got from the committee was to not allow that. So that is what Roland and I will deliver on Thursday morning at our next ALG meeting. Other than that, I do want to encourage as many members as possible to go to the New Twin School Forum on Thursday night. I will not be there. I've got to be there. I've got to be at the moderators meeting in preparation for the special town meeting, which is at the same time. But please do go listen to both proposals and weigh in on which proposal you are more enthusiastic about, because I know everyone likes both options. So weigh in on which one is even better than the other. Okay, that is all I have for committee reports.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.